Right, I finished this sample piece here, which is going to represent the back of the poncho. Now, if you look here, on the side at the left is my little marker, which will be the armhole. I've got the same over here on the right. Now, I don't need to tell you that this is considerably smaller than yours will be in every way. Yours, I mean, we couldn't get our arms in there, could we? But the point being that this little sample piece has given you every stitch and every technique that you will need to be able to make your full size piece. So that's how I'm going to continue. We are now looking at shaping the back piece. Shaping. Now, what does shaping mean? I'm going to just use my sort of pared down printed instructions that I'm working from, and you will see this kind of representation of our shrug or our poncho here. Very clearly, this is the neck. Okay, this picture shows the finished article, if you like, and you can see that this line here is what the back looks like. So just ignore this for now. Let's just look at the outline of it as the back. And what you will see is that we've got the slant going on. It's not square as it is at the bottom edge here. We've got a sort of slanted shoulder. We've got a slight dip in the neck and a slanted shoulder on the other side as well. So what we're now going to do, the shaping is going to, well, create the shape. And we are aiming for a slant and a slight dip at the back of the neck and another slant. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, again, as I've just said, obviously I've got far fewer stitches than you. I've got 41 and you're going to have 125. So the actual numbers in the pattern, the casting off and the knitting on and all that kind of thing, not really important if you're just looking for the technique here. What I am keen to show you are things like casting off the amount of stitches or just casting off the stitches at each end. I'm keen to show you what patterning means and what patterning two together means, because the actual numbers of times I do that is pretty much irrelevant as long as you've got the techniques themselves. So I'm at the point, like I said, in the pattern where I've completed the back piece. I've worked 38 rows of pattern, and then I've placed my marker and I've worked another 38 rows of pattern. So we're at the point in the pattern which is called shape, shoulders and back neck. Okay, I finished row 38, which is the wrong side. So it says finish with the wrong side facing. So I've finished with my wrong side there, and I'm now turning my work ready to work a right side again. So before we do anything else, we need to be aware that we are still working in pattern. So we're working a row here, which will equate to row 1 in our chart. Okay, so once we get going to patterning, we will be looking at row 1 in our chart, but I'll revisit that in a minute. So let's make a start then. Our first instruction tells us that we've got to cast off 8 stitches. So again, I don't want you to worry about the number of times I'm doing this. I'm not going to cast off 8 stitches. I'll end up with nothing left. I'm just going to cast off a few stitches to show you what that actually looks like. Okay. So right. Okay. So I'm going to start my cast off. So I'm just going to cast off knitwise here. I'm not going to worry about knit purl. I'm going to cast them off knitwise. So I'm going to put my needle in as if to knit and knit the first stitch. And I'm going to cast off, let me say, 4 stitches here, but you can cast off the amount in the pattern, which is 8. But I want to make sure you know how to count the cast off. So I haven't cast anything off yet. So I'm going to knit my next stitch and pass that stitch over the top. Now I have now cast off 1 stitch. Okay, I'm going to cast off 4, remember, so I'm now going to, and not until I pass that stitch over the top is that stitch cast off, so that's 2 stitches cast off. I'm going to discard my marker, might need that later, don't know. Knit again. Actually, do you know what, I'm just going to cast off 4, yeah. So 3, so once I've pulled the stitch over the knit stitch, it's now cast off, so I've cast off 3, and I am now cast off number 4. Okay, now you're obviously going to do 8, but what you will see is I've now got, what I've now created, get my yarn out of the way, is I've just created a little corner on the work. So if I lay that down, try and get the needles out the way. This is a problem of working with small cables. You see, they both bring their problems. Basically, if I hold it like that, this comes down straight. I know it's wobbly, but you know what I mean. I've created a little corner there where I've cast off, haven't I? So now, in my pattern, I've cast off my correct number of stitches, and my pattern says pattern to last 2 stitches. So we need to talk about this because this is where you may or may not get in a muddle. Bring our trusty chart back into play. If I said to you a bit earlier, we're now working across. We're working across row 1 of our chart because we've done 2 lots of full repeats of the chart and we're back on row 1. I've cast off the first 4 stitches. So this stitch 5 is on my needle at the moment. So I hope my next stitch should be a knit. Let's see, does that work? If it should be a knit, it should be sitting above a purl. Let's have a look. It is sitting above a purl, so I have got that correct. When you cast yours off, you'll have cast off 8 stitches. You'll have cast 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. And you should be sitting straight above a central double decrease, which will be much easier to know because you should be sitting above this sort of centre spine of the pattern if you've cast off correctly, okay? So I'm now going to, according to the pattern, I've got to pattern to last 2 stitches. And all that means is I've just got to work my work in pattern as I have been for the last 76 rows. So 2 lots of 38, I've been working this pattern. I'm going to carry on doing it again. So off I go then. So I will work across and, you know, getting quite familiar now, hopefully, with how this pattern works. Isn't it pretty? If you're here, you'll have done it. I absolutely love this, and I know I'm working just a small sample here, and I'm thinking, should I just carry on with this and make it a scarf or something? But of course I can't because I have to show you shaping and things. But I think if I weren't, I might even take it back and carry on using it as carry on knitting it as a lovely scarf because it's so pretty. I absolutely love the pattern. Right, sorry, gabbling on. Now I've hit my next stitch marker. Take that off. Sorry, slip it over. Well, you can see there's literally no change now for ages. So I'm just going to knit across this row, and I'll see you when we get towards the end because we are just working a normal row at this point all the way until we get to the other side. So I'll finish that and I'll see you in a minute. Right, so I've worked all the way across. I'm on to the last 3 stitches now. So I've got my pattern told me to pattern all the way across to the last 2 stitches. So I'll just finish this last repeat and slip my stitch marker over, and then my last instruction for this row says pattern 2 together. Now that means I'm going to lose a stitch. I'm going to end up with 1 stitch here. So what's the next stitch after my stitch marker? The next stitch after my stitch marker means it's the next stitch after this repeat, and that is a knit stitch, and therefore I need to knit these 2 together so that I am left with a knit stitch. So just literally going to put a normal knit 2 together on the end there. Okay, so I've only lost 1 stitch at this end. I've cast off a few down this end, just 1 up this end so far. That's about to change, kids. So I'm going to turn the work now, and we're now on a wrong side row, and I'm going to cast off the same that I did down this end actually, which is 4 stitches, I think, I can't remember. And I'm going to go ahead and show you what happens after that. Okay, so we're on a purl row now. So when I'm casting off, I'm going to cast off purlwise. Okay, so sort of the same as knitwise really, except you're purling instead of knitting. So there's no difference in sort of passing stitches over the top of each other. I'm going to cast off 4 here again. So I'm going to put my needle, whoops, got it all wrapped around the yarn there. Let's do that again. So I'm going to needle in as if to purl the stitch, can lose my stitch marker here, and purl another stitch and pull one over the top of the other. That's one stitch cast off. So I was just reading the pattern there, could you tell? And again, so make another purl, pick up that stitch, pass it over the top. That's 2 stitches cast off. I'll do another one. Three stitches cast off. And one more. So that's how you're casting off purl-wise, exactly the same really, isn't it? In terms of lifting the stitches up and over, you're just purling the stitches instead of knitting them. Okay. Okay, so I've cast off my stitches now. Like I said, obviously you're going to be casting off an awful lot more than that, but this is just to show you the technique, don't forget. So I've cast off my stitches, and my next part of my pattern says I've got to pattern 42 stitches, including the stitch after cast off. Now, all that means is that I've got to have 42 stitches on this right needle in total. So I've already got one. Okay, so I'm not going to be now doing 42 because that would leave me with 43 on this needle, and I only want 42 on that needle. Okay, so when you're doing this, count this as stitch number 1 and work another 41 stitches in pattern. All right, now obviously I've got a lot less and we're just looking at techniques here, so I'm going to end up I'm just going to do far fewer than that. I think I worked out I'd do 12. Let's do 12 together, okay? So if my pattern says pattern 12, well, I've already got one there, so I've only got to work 11 stitches. Right, so we need to remember that we've got to work this in pattern, and we need to remember we're on row 2. So during this shaping, you might want to be a bit more vigilant with marking off what row numbers you're on, if that helps you, because we've got a lot going on. We're kind of reducing stitches and working in pattern, and if you're going to get in a muddle like I would, mark your pattern. There's no problem with that at all, or write it on a post-it or whatever you want to do. So I'm now on row 2. I know that because I'm looking at the wrong side of the work, and I'm coming back across this way on my pattern, but I don't have this full amount of stitches because if you remember, I've cast some off in this kind of area at the end here. Now when I look at my pattern, I can work out actually where I am on here, but if you want to count, let me show you how to do that. So at the end of the last row, we lost a stitch because we patterned 2 together, if you remember. So that first stitch is missing. And then I cast off 4 stitches, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then this stitch is sat on my needle, so I haven't got to work that at all. So my first stitch should be a purl stitch because it's a blank square. So it means purl stitch. It should be a purl stitch. Which means it's sitting above a knit stitch. Let's have a little look. Let me move that out the background. It certainly is, and it's this stitch here that I am working on. You should be working on, you're going to cast off 8 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And you'll have lost that. You should, I think, hang on. So you'll have lost that. You'll have cast off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that stitch will be sat on your needle. You should be also sat above a stitch, but you should be on the other side of that centre over here somewhere. Okay, but just count it across on your pattern and you will be able to find where you are. Okay, so then our pattern, we're not going to work, we're not working all the way across this time. We've got to cast some bits off in the middle. Okay, and we're casting off some bits in the middle to start making this dip here. So we're only going to work a few shoulder stitches to cast some more off to make that neck piece. So let me show you. I'm going to work 12 in total, as I said, I think I said. So here's number 1 on my on my needle, and I'm going to work 11 more. Do you know what? To make it easy on myself, I might just hang on, how many have I got here? 2, 4, 6, 8. No, I'm gonna be brave and I'm gonna keep going. Come back over it and start another repeat. I'm gonna make sure I've got 12 on my needle. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. Right, so I've finished my first part of patterning. On your work, you will have made 42 stitches here. Just make sure you've got 42 stitches sitting on this needle. What we're going to do now is cast off some stitches to create this little neck dip, okay, at the back, not the front, the little very, very slight indentation on the neck there, okay. We're going to do that now by casting off a chunk of stitches. And I really wanted to point this out to you because there's an important thing here which catches a lot of people out. 42 stitches are sitting on this needle for you, and you must keep 42 stitches sitting on this needle for you, which means you must not borrow one of these stitches to start your cast off. Let me show you what I mean. So you can see I have got 12 stitches here on my needle, and I'm just going to use that number to illustrate what I mean here. If I start my cast off, and we'll just carry on casting off purlwise, so I've made a stitch and I'm going to pick up my stitch and cast off 1, cast off 2, and so on. Create that little gap. Let's look at how many stitches I've now got here. I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 and 11. So what I've actually done is I've borrowed one of the stitches from my shoulder to create my neck cast off, and I do not want to do that. Okay, I must keep that correct amount of stitches back over on that shoulder side. So let me show you how we can avoid using and losing those stitches, because else our pattern's not going to work and we're going to scratch our heads and we're going to have wonky shoulders. We don't want that. Right. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 and 12. So I want to keep the same amount of stitches on my needle. You want to keep the same amount on yours. You're 42. So what that means is I've just got to knit. I'm purling here. I've got to purl my first stitch. That's going to be my kind of leader to start my casting off. So that's there. I'm not doing anything with that. I'm going to do the next one and cast that off. So I'm going to pick that up and move over that stitch. I have now cast off one stitch. Let me do another one and you'll see what's happening here. And I'll do one more just so you can see. So I'm casting off. This is stitch number 3 that I've cast off. So I've created enough gap there that you can definitely see my cast off is happening to the left and my remaining stitches are on the right. So how many have I got now? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 and 12. Perfect. I have not touched the number of stitches on that shoulder. That is the correct amount. So when I carry on with that pattern, I have got the right amount of stitches there. So it's really, really important that, lads, you need to, lads, chaps, it's really, really important you don't borrow that last stitch to start your cast off. Make sure you make an extra one and carry on that way. I hope that makes sense. I really hope that makes sense. Let me just count to where I need to be down here. I need to lose that 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 and 12. Okay, I'm going to just cast off these last 3 stitches here. You're going to cast off 23. Don't forget, you don't count them until you've actually cast them off. Until your stitch has passed over the top of it, it is not cast off. Okay. Now, when we get to the other end of our casting off, we've got the reverse situation. Okay, we've got our stitch. We've got a stitch sat here on our needle, which must be counted. Must be counted in our final stitch count. So when you're asked to cast off 23 stitches, and then pattern to the last 2 stitches and pattern 2 together and ending up with 42, this must count in that number. Okay, this must count in that number. So reverse happens when you're moving across from the right to the left. So at the beginning you don't count it and at the end you do. I hope that makes sense. I think it makes sense, doesn't it? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Oh, I've done too many now. I need to take one back. Just for my little purposes here, because I've got to try and make a small version that actually makes sense. Right. So 2, 4, 8, yeah, okay. Right, so I've now got enough. I've cast off enough stitches. You can see I've just made a gap, and that's going to create the neck. Yours is obviously going to be bigger. It's going to be 3 times the size of this at least, and then some. But the principle, you'll see the principle. And now I've done that, I am back to working in pattern to the last 2 stitches. Now this again is where these stitch markers are so invaluable because I've only got one stitch left before a stitch marker. So when I go to my pattern, I know I'm on row 2. I know I'm just on the last stitch of the repeat, so I know exactly what that should be. It's a blob. I'm on a reverse side, so therefore it should be a knit stitch. Just so helpful. Really, really recommend these little stitch markers because they can really be the difference between scratching your head for hours on end and just getting on with it. Okay, so I've got one more. I think you're probably going to have about two repeats or something when you are doing yours. I know this is confusing because we're working with different numbers, but it is just the techniques that I need you to know about, and it's just those little things like making sure you count the stitch when it needs to be counted and you don't when it doesn't. That just sort of make the difference, don't they? So 1, 2, 3 across there. Right, so I'm now down to my last 2 stitches. Okay, pattern to the last 2 stitches. Here we are, and I'm going to pattern 2 together. So they are a knit stitch. I've done a purl stitch here, and the next on that pattern will be a knit stitch. So it's a knit 2 together on the end, which is rather handy, I think. Okay, so that is the end of row 2. Let me turn it over and you can see what is happening here. So you can just see what's happening here. Let me move that so that's sat on the table. Right, I've got, hopefully, 12 stitches on my shoulder here, 12 stitches on my shoulder here, and a gap in the middle. Let's count them, make sure. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 and 12, thank goodness. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 and 12, phew. And a gap in the middle. You're going to have 42 and 42 and a gap in the middle. So what we have learnt so far is we have learnt casting off at the beginning of each row. We have learnt working in pattern across until we have to cast off in the middle. And we have learned that when and when not to count the stitch that we're using to cast off with as one of the number. So I'm really hoping that's probably all you need to know for casting off and doing the neck shaping. So from this point onwards, you've got more of the same really. You've got some casting off at each end, some working in pattern. However, what is different is, of course, we've made this gap in the middle, so we can only do one bit at a time. Can't work all the way across there, of course. So you're going to just be working on first side of neck shaping and second side of neck shaping. Okay, so first side and second side. So what I think I'll do is I'll do the first side so you can see what it looks like, and then I'll come back to you when we're on the second side, because we've got to rejoin yarn and things like that. So I'm going to just work some of these rows and I'll come back to you.